Imagine, for a second, digging deep into the archives of military history and stumbling upon a record so chilling, it honestly reads less like a dry textbook and way more like a massive corporate crime ledger. Well, today, we are opening up that exact dossier. We're looking at what is arguably one of the most mind-bending hostile takeovers in all of human history. This is the story of how the East India Company, a group of guys who literally just arrived on foreign shores to trade spices and textiles, somehow, inexplicably forged an absolute global empire.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really get the tone of this historical thriller, you just need to look at this single, completely unvarnished phrase pulled straight from our source text. It says, the company's actions were, quote, often inglorious and almost never honorable. So right out of the gate, we know we aren't looking at some sanitized, polite version of trade history that you'd find in a dusty museum brochure. Instead, we are unraveling a deeply complex 250-year narrative of calculated force. It's a story packed with soaring triumphs, absolutely devastating tragedies, and quite frankly, a staggering amount of corporate ruthlessness.
The architect of this specific historical audit we're following is M.S. Naravana. His meticulously detailed book, Battles of the Honorable East India Company, is essentially our map for this explainer. You can really think of this book as an active crime board. It systematically catalogs the evolution of a trading company's military ethos. It tracks the precise, highly calculated moves made by board members sitting safely in London, all to secure total geopolitical dominance thousands and thousands of miles away.
Now, what's really interesting about this is a single, solitary number, 74. In our source dossier, Naravani includes exactly 74 maps to illustrate these events. Just think about that for a second. 74. These aren't just pretty geographical illustrations. They are a tactical blueprint. Each map is essentially a snapshot of a massive, high-stakes board game where the prizes were actual kingdoms. It perfectly demonstrates how a trading company methodically painted the map of India in their own corporate colors over 2.5 centuries.
But how did they actually operate on the ground? Well, the book highlights this deeply unsettling juxtaposition. On one hand, the company's history is marked by what the records call great valor and dignity. Highly disciplined military maneuvers, logistical brilliance, undeniable strategic genius. But then, right alongside that, we see acts of profound disrepute and disgrace. It's the ultimate corporate paradox. Back home in England, they were men of business. They were concerned with ledgers and polite society. But abroad, thousands of miles away from any real oversight, the mask completely slipped. The boardroom became a war room, and the endless pursuit of profit suddenly justified incredibly ruthless behavior.
Section 1. The Phantom Corporation. And this brilliantly illustrates the inciting incident of our entire historical thriller. It begs a question that kind of defies logic. How exactly does a merchant fleet transform into a phantom government? Well, they used a terrifyingly simple yet highly effective three-step formula. Step 1. Subjugated by conquests. When native rulers resisted, the company didn't sit down and negotiate, they just used overwhelming military force to break them. Step 2. Shackled by treaties. They stripped away the ruler's sovereignty entirely under the guise of diplomacy. And finally, Step 3. Exist at the pleasure of the Governor-General. Any surviving kings were basically left as mere figureheads. It was an absolute masterclass in systematic subjugation.
Section 2. The 250-year warpath.
Once that three-step formula was perfected, diplomacy pretty much took a backseat, and we enter the climax of the company's story. To even begin to grasp the sheer scale of this relentless military machine, we have to look at the timeline bracketing Naravani's analysis. The violence started really early on, testing the waters in 1612 with a naval battle off the coast of Swali. Fast forward a bit to 1757, and the company is completely entrenched in British politics and society while radically expanding its footprint abroad. This all culminates around 1849 with the Second Sikh War and the massive annexation of the Punjab. We are talking about 250 years of continuous, unbroken military pressure, just creeping steadily inward from the coast.
But perhaps what makes this dossier even more chilling is what it actually doesn't contain. Naravani explicitly notes that the Afghan Wars, the Burma Wars, and the massive mutiny of 1857 are totally excluded from this specific volume. Now, why is that? Because the sheer volume of military action undertaken by this single corporation is so overwhelmingly vast that putting together a comprehensive book covering every single battle would be practically impossible. So these massive omitted conflicts just loom in the background of our story, hinting at a scope of violence and imperial ambition that spilled out far, far beyond the borders of India itself.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because the scale of this ambition becomes incredibly clear when you look at the company's ultimate hit list. I mean, just read through these names. We aren't just talking about taking out local chieftains. We are talking about battling global European superpowers, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and then you have these massive, incredibly sophisticated native empires, the mighty Mughals, the Marathas, Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan of Mysore, the fierce Gurkhas, and the powerful Sikhs. Every single one of them was targeted, engaged, and neutralized by a board of directors. It is a staggering geopolitical sweep.
Section 3. Anatomy of an Empire.
Now that the dust has somewhat settled on the battlefield, what is the actual anatomy of a conquest driven solely by shareholders? To answer that, we have to step away from the cannons and look at the cold, hard paperwork of imperialism. You'll find this right at the back of Naravani's book, in the appendices. Here, the true corporate nature of the conquest is just laid completely bare. You don't find poetry here. You don't find grand philosophical justifications. You just find lists. You have acquisitions, which is a clinical ledger of conquered lands treated exactly like corporate assets. And then you have genealogies, meticulous records of the bloodlines of the deposed native rulers. It's the chilling, purely bureaucratic archiving of an ancient civilization, neatly filed away by the exact same clerks who orchestrated its downfall.
Which finally brings us to a huge question drawn directly from Chapter 11 of our source text. Why did the company triumph? Seriously, how did a group of merchants outmaneuver ancient dynasties and rival global empires to pull off the greatest hostile takeover in human history? Was it superior military technology? Was it just sheer ruthlessness? Or was it a fatal lack of unity among their enemies? The evidence left behind forces us to grapple with the terrifying reality of what actually happens when a corporation is just handed the keys to an empire. It's a reality that, quite frankly, forces us to question the unchecked power of corporations even today. I'm going to leave you to ponder that one. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history behind the headlines.